Good morning, grade twos. Today in history and geography, we're going to learn about a woman named Rosa Parks, who was the mother of the civil rights movement. I know that some of you may have already learned about this story in the beginning of this year, but let's do today's read aloud one more time to find out about how Rosa Parks helped to start the civil rights movement by doing something that was very courageous. Before we begin today's read aloud, here are some of the new words that we will be seeing today. Assign. Assign is to give someone a particular seat or job. For example, some teachers assign seats to their students. The next word is boycott. A boycott is an action in which people refuse to buy or use something in order to protest and bring about change. For example, the community planned to boycott the store that refused to recycle. Boycott. The next word is disrupted. Disrupted is prevented something from happening in its usual way. For example, the movie was disrupted when the DVD player broke. The next word is injustice. Injustice is a lack of fairness, or a situation in which people are not treated very fairly. For example, abolitionists believed that slavery was an injustice and fought to end it. The last word is segregation. Segregation is the practice of keeping grounds of people separate or apart due to reasons such as race. For example, because of segregation, Jackie Robinson was not able to eat at the same restaurant as his teammates when they traveled to play baseball. So I want you to pay attention to these words as you're hearing today's read aloud. Here we go. Rosa Louise Parks was born a long time ago in 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama. Rosa grew up on a small farm with her brother, mother, and grandparents. Rosa was a happy child. She loved her family. However, Rosa lived at a time and in a place where African Americans faced discrimination. This was especially true in the South, where Rosa lived, because in the parts of the United States there was segregation. Because of segregation, African Americans and white people did not go to the same schools, eat at the same restaurants, or go to the same movie theaters. When traveling by bus, African Americans were expected to sit in certain seats. It was as if African Americans and white people lived in different worlds. When Rosa was a little girl, she attended a school that was just for African American children. It was an old one-room schoolhouse that only held classes for 5 months of each year. Far too often, there weren't enough desks or school supplies for the students. Rosa noticed that buses took white children to the new school near where she lived. When Rosa was 16, she had to leave school to take care of her grandmother and mother, who had both become ill. To help support the family, Rosa worked in a shirt factory. When Rosa was 19, she married Raymond Parks. Raymond was a barber. He was also actively involved in the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This organization wanted to make life in the United States fairer and safer for all African Americans and segregation in the South. Rosa also became involved and served as a Montgomery chapter secretary. In addition, she returned to high school to earn her high school diploma. That day, Rosa's life when she stood up for what was right. Actually, Rosa did not stand up, and that's the reason why we remember and honor Rosa Parks to this day. The evening of December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, was cold. The streets were full of people shopping or making their way home from work. By this time, Rosa had a job as a seamstress at a local department store. Her job was to sew and make clothes. Her day had just ended, and she had rushed to catch the city bus that would take her home. As Rosa boarded the bus, she could see that it was already quite full. Because the section of the deck of the bus where African Americans usually sat was so full, Rosa found a seat near the middle of the bus. The seat Rosa found was just behind the seats reserved for white people. Before long, all the seats on the bus were full, and several white people were left standing. Back then, the bus driver had the authority or power to move people, and African Americans were the first to be moved. The bus driver noticed the people standing and ordered several African American people on the bus to give up their seats. All of them did as he asked except for Rosa. When the bus driver told Rosa that if she did not stand up, he would call the police to come and arrest her and take her to jail, she quietly responded, "You may do that." When he asked her one more time to stand up, Rosa responded by saying, "I don't think I should have to stand up." The bus driver made the call, and before long, a police officer arrived. The officer wanted to know why she would not give up her seat. Rosa responded by asking the officer a question. "Why are you always pushing us around?" she asked. Rosa was arrested and taken to the police headquarters. Later that night, she was released. The law at that time in Alabama gave bus drivers the right to assign seats, to tell people where to sit. Bus drivers were also allowed to carry guns. As a result, many African American people felt threatened and were frightened to challenge or go against this practice, but Rosa had done so. Rosa later said that she had not planned to protest, but in that moment, her desire for civil rights and her sense of injustice drove her to make that decision. "When I made that decision," Rosa said, "I knew that I had the strength of my ancestors with me." This was the moment that changed history. Rosa had refused to move, and now others would show their support for her. It was decided that the hundreds of African Americans who rode the city buses to work would walk instead. This kind of action is called a boycott. A boycott is when people choose not to use a service or a business due to certain reasons. The NAACP began to organize what became known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. A young man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the boycott. Dr. King said, "We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Beginning on December 5, 1955, people refused to ride the city buses in Montgomery. The boycott lasted for 382 days. Without passengers to ride the buses couldn't afford to run. At that time in Montgomery, more than 7 out of every 10 riders on buses were African Americans. Businesses were disrupted. On November 13, 1956, the United States Supreme Court decided that Montgomery's segregated bus seating was unconstitutional. That meant that it was against the law. The boycott ended shortly after that. Buses became integrated and African American people could sit wherever they wanted. That boycott became a powerful way for people to peacefully protest. Rosa Parks' actions helped to start the civil rights movement. In fact, Rosa became known as the mother of civil rights movement. Rosa remained an active member of the NAACP and other civil rights groups. She showed her support for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by participating in civil rights marches. Later in her life, Rosa worked with a Michigan congressman. She also founded an institution to help young people complete their education. In her lifetime, Rosa received several awards for her courage and her work. In 1979, the NAACP awarded Rosa its Spring Iron Medal. Rosa also received 2 important U.S. government awards, the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. Rosa once said, "I'd see the bus pass every day, but to me, that was a way of life. We had no choice but to accept that was the custom. The bus was among the first ways I realized there was a black world and a white world. By her own courageous actions, Rosa Parks changed the world. Rosa became a symbol of the power of nonviolence. Her quiet, courageous act changed America